WarLock Eternal. WarLock Eternal. Apparently I'm a witch. A warlock. You're listening to WarLock Eternal, presented by Hakeem Alibokus Alexander on Spreaker, social podcasting, and Wisdom, Social Audio Inc., presented for World Reading Club in association with exercisingyourmind.com, worldreadingclub.com, and Uniquilibrium. This edition's reading focus comes to us from the 50-year anniversary edition of the Witches Almanac. Don't worry, I'm not reading the whole thing. And also the Occult Book, A Chronological Journey from Alchemy to Wicca. The Witches Almanac goes from 1971 to 2021. Well, it's still present. And that's taken over by Andrew Theotic. The original, I think it was started by Elizabeth Pepper, who's mentioned in the book, and there's an interview with her there. And the Occult Book is John Michael Greer. All knowledge and all power is in all places at all times. This is something that I've been forming my thesis around for quite some time, and it has continued to solidify, especially listening to recordings of Flor Elizabeth Carrasco. And one of the recordings that she says to me and a new friend that we met in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, she says that the way you want to live your life is mastered by your own self. And as I continue to just travel around and go from place to place, usually finding a Barnes & Noble's bookstore somewhere, I keep finding reinforcement, if you will, for this idea. Or these ideas. Well, it's really one idea. And I'll get to that now from the introductions to, and a few articles. So it's in the introduction I started looking at in the Occult Book, and then the introduction and a few articles from the Witches Almanac. And so, in the description on Spreaker, I put that apparently I'm a witch / warlock because, for all intents and purposes, everything that I've been saying, the conclusions I've come to in my own research about what I'm following, whereas I agree with what Christopher Howard said when I took some of his courses through the University of Excellence many years ago when I was a student at the Hypnosis Motivation Institute. He said, the universe is a formless neutral substance that responds directly to the nature of our thoughts. And, of course, in The Science of Getting Rich, Wallace D. Wattles says, there is a thinking stuff from which all things are made, and which in its original state permeates and penetrates the interspaces of the universe. A thought in this original substance can cause the things that we think about to be created. In the book and the video, The Secret, they say that we become what we think about, and thoughts become things. Of course, in many other books like Ulysses S. Anderson's 3 Magic Words, you hear all in God, God in all, and also pointing out in many places about the law of attraction. It's also in the book Think and Grow Rich. It's also mentioned in The Science of Mind, in which Ernest Holmes also says that there is but one mind, which mind is God. It is the only mind there is. You also have James Allen from As a Man Thinketh, which is, I believe, a biblical quote saying from Jesus, which says that as a man thinketh, so is he. And it's on and on in so many of the books that I've looked at. I mean, what comes to mind is Robert Collier's The Secret of the Ages, and Earl Nightingale, his 1956 recording The Strangest Secret, also comes to mind. And where he says we become what we think about, of course. And I mean, there are so many places where you'll find this. Those I just can recall from the top of my head at the moment. I know that there are many others, but that is a good time for me now to go into the little bit of information from the introduction and a few articles from the Witches Almanac and the Occult Book. The Occult Book is calling out to me first right now, so I'm going to start there. And it's a beautiful hardcover book they have here at Barnes & Noble's. Again, it's called The Occult Book, A Chronological Journey from Alchemy to Wicca by John Michael Greer. It's a beautiful black field as the cover. It's a nice fabric covering with gold and bronze colored foil on it. And, you know, you've got a torch, a staff of Asclepius. It's really nice cover on the book. And let's see, this is published by Sterling, New York. This particular one was published in, the text is copyright 2017, John Michael Greer. And right in the beginning after the, it was manufactured in China. Nice to know. For some of you don't know, I have spent 5 years living there, in China, that is. So right after the good old copyright material here in the beginning of the book, there's a quote, and it says, "The world is not prepared yet to understand the philosophy of occult sciences. Let them assure themselves first of all that there are beings in an invisible world, whether spirits of the dead or elementals, and that there are hidden powers in man which are capable of making a god of him on earth." Again, all knowledge and all power is in all places at all times. Again, as Flora Elizabeth Carrasco said, the way you want to live your life is mastered by your own self. So that quote was in the beginning here is by H.P. Blavatsky, who lived from 1831 to 1891. I believe that's Helen, right? Elena Blavatsky? I'm not sure. I see these names all over the place. But again, it says, "The world is not prepared yet to understand the philosophy of occult sciences. Let them assure themselves, first of all, that there are beings in an invisible world, whether spirits of the dead or elementals, and that there are hidden powers in man which are capable of making a god of him on earth." H.P. Blavatsky. I'm going through all of this because it continues to resonate with me, and I'm pretty sure it's because of all the things that I've read and seen and listened to, but they definitely ring my bells. They resonate with me. And again, something else that Christopher Howard, who founded the University of Excellence some years ago, I don't know if it's still extant. I believe Christopher Howard is still around, but he said that the universe is a formless neutral substance that responds directly to the nature of our thoughts. And on all of those different ideas that are the same, which are really one idea, that from the many different authors that I've mentioned before, Wallace D. Wattles, Earl Nightingale, Ernest Holmes, James Allen, Robert Collier, Ulysses S. Anderson. I could go on and on with those. But the idea that they believe Earl Nightingale in the audio recording from 1956, The Strangest Secret, said, "We become what we think about." In the movie and the book, The Secret, they say thoughts become things. And why do I choose to continue to align myself with such an idea? And Christopher Howard said, I continue to believe in this way because it consistently helps me to achieve the results that I desire. And I believe that if you're going to follow anything at all, that should be one of the main reasons, the main points to look at if you're going to follow or use or think about or focus on anything. Does it consistently help you to achieve the results that you desire? Of course, there may be some interesting caveats, some other cautions that you should use there that perhaps you should not take away from anybody else, because in fact you don't need to. You don't need to compete. You don't need to hold other people down in order to achieve the results that you desire consistently. You can operate by the law of mutual exchange, right? There's enough to go around for everyone. We live in an open rather than a closed system of existence, even though there are closed systems of existence within the eternal open system of existence. But we don't have to live as if we're in a closed one. And this, like Loki said in the Avengers movie, that humans were in this mad scramble for power. But that should be this idea that if we're going to choose to practice, rather I should say that than follow, but practice anything, it should be because it helps us to continually achieve the results that we desire without taking away from anyone else, because there's enough to go around and we can operate through the law of mutual exchange. And now I'll continue to read from the Occult Book and from the introduction. I'll read the entire introduction and maybe a few of the articles that are in there before I go on to the Witches Almanac. All of this to support my thesis, which is going into my PhD thesis, University of Metaphysical Sciences. And it's the underlying idea, right? Once again, Flora Elizabeth Carrasco said, "The way you want to live your life is mastered by your own self." And I say that all knowledge and all power is in all places at all times. And that's because of the omni-factors that are put forward by even the most popular of the Abrahamic religions, right? That supposedly, if there is in fact a God that created the universe, it always was, because it was never created, right? It is and it always will be. And by that logic, you cannot have anything separate. Something that is omnipresent is in all places at all times. That's the very nature of the idea, omnipresent. Omniscient is all-knowing, and that's because of being in all places at all times. And of course, if you're omnipresent and omniscient everywhere at all times, knowing all things in all times, then of course you have power at all times. That's omnipotent. But that does not mean that the being, the God, is some anthropomorphized, angry creature that gets mad at people and throws lightning bolts at them. No, those are gods, not the God which is within and all around us. It is everyone and everything. And so it expresses itself as each one of us, whether we be angels or demons, which are really the same thing. And I'm actually going to get to that. Let me get to the reading part of World Reading Club here. All right. The introduction, the Occult Book. It starts off with another quote. "The gates of the mysteries stand ever ajar, and those who will may pass through into the spacious domicile of spirit." Manly P. Hall, from The Secret Teachings of all ages. Continuing. In most of the world's cultures and through most of the world's history, the things that people in the modern Western world consider occult, amulets and talismans, omens and divinations, spells and charms, spirits, good and evil, are simply part of everyday life. If you go into a Shinto shrine in Japan, for example, or to a temple of one of the traditional religions of West Africa, you can count on seeing things done there that would qualify as occultism in Europe or America. In these societies, nothing sets those things apart from any other body of traditional knowledge. People engage in them all the time without ever suspecting that they are doing something secret, forbidden, or irrational. In the Western world, for complicated historical reasons, this hasn't been the case. Instead, starting in Roman times and accelerating with the triumph of Christianity, what we know as the occult was set apart as forbidden lore. From the first stirrings of anti-occult hysteria through the horrors of the burning times, when hundreds of thousands of people were tortured and executed on suspicion of practicing magic, tremendous social pressures, backed by the threat of violence, fell on anyone who took an interest in the occult. Yet, the occult traditions of the Western world managed to survive all that, finding new practitioners in every generation. That astonishing story of suppression, survival, and rebirth, extending over more than 2.5 millennia, is the subject of this book. The word occult literally means hidden, and its application to what we now call the occult has a long history. During the Renaissance, writers who wanted to refer to magic, divination, and the alternative spirituality connected with them began to use the term occult philosophy, that is, hidden philosophy, for those subjects. That habit became permanent when Cornelius Agrippa titled his great textbook of Renaissance magic 3 Books of Occult Philosophy. Later, during the revival of magic in the 19th century, French authors started using the word occultisme, in English, occultism, for the same subjects. It can be useful to think of occultism as the rejected knowledge of the Western world. Every society has some body of knowledge that has been condemned by the intellectual authorities of the time, but still is studied and taught outside the normal channels of education and public opinion. In industrial nations today, the explosive growth of knowledge has been matched by an equally explosive growth in rejected knowledge, much of this has nothing to do with occultism. Again, in industrial nations today, the explosive growth of knowledge has been matched by an equally explosive growth in rejected knowledge, and much of this has nothing to do with occultism. Still, the occult remains the oldest and most savagely persecuted of all the Western world's bodies of rejected knowledge. Among the core elements of occultism are these: magic, the science and art of causing changes in consciousness at will, according to its great 20th century practitioner, Dion Fortune. The mage, or practitioner of magic, uses rituals, symbolism, meditation, and other methods to enter into unusual states of consciousness in which, according to occult teachings, subtle powers can be directed and disembodied entities contacted to cause changes in the world. There's a nice image here. I don't know. It's a patent medicine label from around 1892 depicting a witch at her cauldron. I want to make a comment on the... it says, the occult remains the oldest and most savagely persecuted of all the Western world's bodies of rejected knowledge. And this is one of the things that has been happening anytime. Another part of my thesis is that anytime anyone or any doctrine attempts to put... I'll put it this way. I'll use the hypnotic modalities. And the second hypnotic modality is translogic, paradigm, and doctrine. So anytime anyone says, right, translogic, something they want to tell you to quickly change your mind about something. So any translogic that's used, any paradigm, right, something that's formulated, sort of like a thesis before it's written, and any doctrine, like a Bible or anything like that, attempts to put limitations upon you. It's probably a good idea to hear it and listen to it, but not to follow being limited. And all of the doctrines and instructions and translogics, people's sayings, teachings, and things like that say that things cannot be done, in my opinion, should be rejected. They can be entertained. You can hear them and understand them as a perspective within this existence, this reality. It's a perspective that people have. But it is not existence itself, is not reality. You can hear what people have to say, but it doesn't have to be followed, especially if another part of this thesis that comes from Christopher Howard, which is that if it does not help you to consistently achieve the results that you desire, my question is, why should you practice or follow such a thing? And it's this that my understanding has come to is the reason why there are so many convoluted, complicated, ornamental ways that are really blocking you from your own truth and the truth of existence and reality. These things that say that you have to go through intermediaries and that you have to do things in a certain way, or else you're going to, for example, burn in hell or be cast into oblivion and this and that. These are all ways to scare and give fear to people from being able to accomplish greater and better things for themselves. And that I wanted to make the comment on this part of the introduction that says, still, the occult remains the oldest and most savagely persecuted of all the Western world's bodies of rejected knowledge. And it is in that I'm finding and understanding to be more and more so true as time goes along. So I'll continue now with the introduction to the Occult Book. So we first started off, it says, so among the core elements of occultism are these: magic, the science and art of causing changes in consciousness at will, according to its great 20th century practitioner, Dion Fortune. The mage, or practitioner of magic, uses rituals, symbolism, meditation, and other methods to enter into unusual states of consciousness in which, according to occult teachings, subtle powers can be directed and disembodied entities contacted to cause changes in the world. Divination, more commonly known as fortune-telling. This is the art of knowing hidden things in the present and secrets of the future through the same subtle links that in occult tradition make magic work. The tarot card reader who shuffles and deals cards. The astrologer who studies the positions of the planets at a particular moment. And diviners using other methods all try to tap into the flow of unseen forces that will allow them to glimpse the unknown. Initiation. the process by which an ordinary person develops the powers and abilities needed to master magic and divination. There are many methods of initiation, but the most famous are elaborate ceremonies that enact symbolic dramas, catalyzing changes in the consciousness of the new initiate. The mystery rituals of ancient Greece were famous initiations in their time. More recently, the rituals of magical lodges, such as the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn and the Martinist Order, serve the same function. Alchemy. Often dismissed by modern scientists as a failed attempt to turn lead into gold, alchemy is far more diverse and far more practical. To an alchemist, every material substance has a potential for perfection, and the methods of alchemy are used to help each substance achieve its perfection. Alchemists thus prepare herbal medicines, practice spiritual meditation, and work with a dizzying array of substances in their pursuit of hidden knowledge. Occult philosophy. Underlying these occult practices is a philosophy that explains how and why occultism works. Three main schools of occult philosophy have played a predominant role in the history of occultism. Neoplatonism, or Neoplatonism, an offshoot of the philosophy of Plato, emerged in ancient Greece. Hermeticism, a blend of Greek philosophy and Egyptian magical teaching, had its start in Egypt. And Kabbalah, spelled C-A-B-A-L-A, also spelled K-A-B-B-A-L-A-H, and Q-A-B-A-L-A-H. The most recent of the three was born in the Jewish communities of southern France. All three have strong similarities with one another and draw on many of the same sources. Again, we're talking about Neoplatonism, Hermeticism, and Kabbalism. Continuing. These core ingredients, combined with one another and with an assortment of other practices and teachings, make up the heart of the occult traditions of the West. From the 6th century BCE, when the first known occult school was founded in the Western world by Pythagoras of Samos, they have been handed down, sometimes publicly and sometimes in secret, sometimes by way of organizations such as the Rosicrucians, and sometimes from individual teachers to students, all the way to the present. The pages that follow present 100 important events in the history of occultism, stations, if you will, along the road that leads from Pythagoras to the present day. It is a long and winding journey that covers the whole range of human possibility, from the heights of spiritual aspiration to the depths of folly and fraud, and an uncomfortably long part of the route is made hideous by the screams of the tortured and the scent of burning flesh. Where will the road lead next as the occult traditions of today respond to the challenges of tomorrow? No one knows. But the transformations through which occultism already has passed suggest that its story is far from over. Okay. Now, the first thing it goes to in this book, which I'm not going to read, is talks about Pythagoras. It says Pythagoras comes to Crotona. It has several other sections in there, but I am going to go to one that comes after a section called Miriam the Alchemist, which is titled The Death of Jesus, or actually Death of Jesus. But before I get to that, I'm going to actually go to the Witches Almanac and start in the beginning here for a moment. As I'm weaving all these things together for the thesis, remember the thesis, which is the way you want to live your life is mastered by your own self, because all knowledge and all power is in all places at all times. So this is the 50-year anniversary edition of the Witches Almanac, an anthology of a half a century of collected magical lore, 1971 to 2021 by Andrew Theotic. Okay, let's take a look. Where shall I start here? Actually, I might just look at, I'll look at the preface here and then go to the particular sections that I wanted to share that go along with the thesis. Remember, all knowledge and all power is in all places at all times, or are in all places at all times. The way you want to live your life is mastered by your own self. Preface. This is from the 1971 edition. Centuries of arcane lore add up to the witchcraft experience. Despite the vast storehouse of knowledge that fills the world's libraries, both public and private, most magic remains in the oral sphere, rigorously preserved secrets handed down reverently from one generation to the next. The study of witchcraft is the understanding of nature and the ability to tread its path with confidence as a surfer is able to step on and off a wave at will, using its energy and force as long as he can accept its immutable direction. The theory and practice of witchcraft is possible. The theory and practice of witchcraft is possible only to those who truly believe, but to them it becomes an unsurpassable art, in which nature is neither master nor servant, but an invincible ally, in whose harmony all things can be achieved. To the true skeptic, nothing is possible. Nothing can be taken on faith alone. His subconscious slumbers beneath the earth, like a dormant seed before the warm sun melts the insulating snow, nurturing its quest for awareness. The scientists have had their day, and once again the old religion is coming to the fore. The bankrupt religious and political philosophies of the past 20 centuries, with their unceasing battle against the forces of nature, have only served to prove how impotent is the alliance of man and machine. But the winds of change are blowing, and once again, the individual is about to assert himself. As so many times in the past, witchcraft will illuminate the darkness. You may wonder why I call this WarLock Eternal. It's because even though I've perhaps even, derogatorily called other people witches, I've had to accept that I've been following the same path for a very long time without knowing it. Maybe even having been myself hypnotized or brainwashed by all the things that I've been reading. I mean, you look at the beginning of the book, The Science of Getting Rich by Wallace D. Wattles, and he says that let me just take a look at it here. It's in the New Thought collection that I have here open on my Nook, or the Nook tablet. Let's see. So, this is Think and Grow Rich. Let me go to the Science of Getting Rich. It should be in here. But basically, I'll paraphrase it. He says that the monistic theory of the universe, the idea that, all is one and one is all, he says it's of Hindu origin. Let's see. There we go. The Science of Getting Rich. All right. So he says that, the study of metaphysics, right? He says here it goes. The monistic theory of the universe, the theory that one is all, and that all is one, which, by the way, I remind you that those are the three magic words in the book from U.S. Anderson, or Ulysses S. Anderson, that you'll eventually find in the book. Is he says, God in all in God. So, Wallace D. Waddell says, the monistic theory of the universe, the theory that one is all and that all is one, that one substance manifests itself as the seeming many elements of the material world, is of Hindu origin and has been gradually winning its way into the thought of the Western world for 200 years. It is the foundation of all the Oriental philosophies and of those of Descartes, Spinoza, Leibniz, Schopenhauer, Hegel, and Emerson. So perhaps it is from reading books like that, Think and Grow Rich, The Science of Getting Rich, The Science of Mind, As a Man Thinketh, The Secret of the Ages, the book The Secret, the audio recording The Strangest Secret, so on and so forth, that has gotten into me, and that's why these things are so resonant with me, and why I have truly embraced that all knowledge and all power is in all places at all times, and that the way the way you want to live your life is mastered by your own self. And from my experience playing out that to be the case, all the good, the bad, and the ugly is maybe in part because of that, or some of the other things that I saw when I was growing up at home. So now, continuing in the Witches Almanac, let's see, one of the first things I'm going to read here is actually one of the longer articles that I saw here from 2016. It's on page 269, and it's titled Magic That Works. Magic That Works. It's a good one from what I started to read. Most of the things I like to cold read, but this was so fascinating and so in alignment with my thesis that I looked at it a little bit longer. But here it goes. Magic That Works, page 269, from 2016 edition of the Witches Almanac. From a pagan perspective, the visible world... Now, I must remind you again, the thesis. All knowledge and all powers in all places at all times. The way you want to live your life is mastered by your own self, right? So, continuing. Magic That Works. From a pagan perspective, the visible world is the expression of a reality that both permeates and transcends it. From this, it follows that behind its rich diversity lies a subtle unity, which, in turn, reflects the interconnectedness of its myriad parts. Here's an interesting connect. As I was reading this, I was just thinking about what he just said is so in alignment with what I just read from Wallace D. Waddell's, right? Remember, because you remember, if you had read the book The Science of Getting Rich, he says that there is a thinking stuff from which all things are made, and which in its original state permeates and penetrates the interspaces of the universe. Well, here in the Magic That Works article, he says that the visible world is the expression of a reality that both permeates and transcends it. Right? And that's what reminded me of Wallace D. Waddell. Now, another thing, as we go further into this article, it reminds me of what we just looked at from The Science of Getting Rich, where he says that the monistic theory of the universe, the theory that one is all and that all is one, that the one substance manifests itself as the seemingly many elements of the material world, is of Hindu origin, right? Well, here in the Magic That Works article, he continues and says, as Hinduism puts it, these are but the million faces of Brahman. Herein lies the secret of why magic, real magic, that is, not the smoke and mirrors kind, actually works. For centuries, the words magic and witchcraft have been virtually interchangeable, although surviving records make it hard to distinguish between what witches got up to in the past and what their accusers invented, or, for that matter, what witches themselves invented in order to satisfy their tormentors. Interestingly enough, Among the lurid tales of orgies, curses, familiars, and demons, well captured by Goya in his paintings, there is mention also of nocturnal feasts, allegedly presided over by a goddess, where the serious business of magic was conducted. This last detail is sometimes overlooked by those who argue, not completely without justification, that modern witchcraft is the invention of an ex-colonial civil servant on the south coast of England close to 70 years ago. It is indisputable that without a touch of magic, there is no such thing as witchcraft. The art of causing change. What has by now become a standard definition of magic was provided by Aleister Crowley, no saint, but no monster either, who defined it as the art of causing change to occur in conformity with the will. Dion Fortune, his more respectable contemporary, called it the art of causing changes to occur in consciousness. But this tells us little, as changes in consciousness can be induced by a variety of means, among them drugs, meditation, and fasting, none of which requires us to put on ceremonial dress or, as the case may be, strip off and invoke pagan gods. No, by change, Crowley certainly meant more than a different state of awareness from our everyday. No, by change, Crowley certainly meant more than a different state of awareness from our everyday one. Now I have to retrace or backtrack a little bit from going back to what I just read in the Occult Book. They also reference Dion Fortune in the introduction here. I want to make sure that I am seeing that correctly. Again, remember, a lot of this I read when something just kind of calls out to me intuitively. I read it cold because I feel like it is going to uphold and support my thesis, and so far this has. And in the introduction to the Occult Book by John Michael Greer, he says, among the core elements of occultism are these: magic, and he quotes, the science and art of causing changes in consciousness at will, which actually is a little bit different from what is in this article here, where he says that Dion Fortune says the art of causing changes to occur in consciousness. Those look like two totally different quotes, but they're both attributed to Dion Fortune. So one of them is the science and art of causing changes in consciousness at will. Okay, that's what comes from the Occult Book. The art and science of causing changes in consciousness at will. And then in the Witches Almanac, he says that Dion Fortune's more respectable contemporary called it the art of causing changes to occur in consciousness. Similar, but not the same quote, right? The art of causing changes in consciousness at will, and the art of causing changes to occur in consciousness. Similar, but not the same. But you know what? This does remind me of something from the 1972 book by Dr. Andrew Weil. He's a medical doctor who works out of Arizona. I'm not certain if it's the University of Arizona or Arizona State University, but it's somewhere there that he either practices now or did at once, and he opened up an organization there called the School of Integrative Medicine. But in his 1972 book, and I'm paraphrasing this, but a lot of it is very accurate to what he said, he talked about psychosis. And he talked about psychosis in this way. He says that you can have positive psychotics and negative psychotics. And he said that in the same way that a negative psychotic is, how would I put it this way, a liability to society, and he said, in the same way that a negative psychotic is a liability to society, a positive psychotic is an asset to society. And he says that the things that stand in the way are most modern psychological and psychiatric treatments and the medicines. And he says that the National Institutes of I'm not sure if he says in the last North American organization to realize this. I'm not sure if he referenced the National Institutes of Health or the National Institute of Mental Health, but he says they're the last North American institution to recognize this. And he says that, he continues to say that he believes in the positive potential of psychosis. He believes that, he says he'll go to the extent to say that psychotics are the evolutionary vanguard of our species because they have the ability to change reality simply by changing their minds. This is Andrew Weil, MD, says this. And he says he'll go so far as to say that psychotics may be the evolutionary vanguard of our species because they have the ability to change reality simply by changing their minds. So maybe perhaps this is something close to what Dion Fortune meant and what magic is, right? They can change reality by changing your mind. So if magic is the science and art of causing a change in consciousness at will, changing consciousness at will is changing your mind, right? Or as it's also quoted in the Witches Almanac, that the art of causing change to occur, the art of causing changes to occur in consciousness, right? Changing consciousness is changing your mind. And so if by what Andrew Weil says that psychotics, I will even go so far as to say maybe perhaps untrained warlocks, witches, magicians, sorcerers, sorceresses that don't have control of it, sort of like the witch Diane in A Discovery of Witches, which I was watching that show and I came to look at it today and it was gone from Max, and I found out that they only had it from September to October, so I didn't get to finish binge watching it, but it was pretty good. But Diane, she in that show, she didn't have control over her powers because she was spellbound at one point in time. And then she also rejected it throughout her life, and so it was kind of chaotic for a while and only responded to her emotionally when she really needed it. So it was good in one way, but then she started to learn how to control it. But I think that a lot of psychotics, and I've had experience with several of them, people who are called psychotic, being people who are in psychiatric institutions or on psychiatric medicine. I believe that many of them are untrained and or been mistreated, like Andrew Weil says in his book, The Natural Mind from 1972, that most psychiatric and psychological treatments and institutions and medications are a hindrance to the development, the proper development of positive potential of psychosis, which he believes psychotics are the evolutionary vanguard of our species because they have the ability to change reality simply by changing their minds. That's what shamans were back in the day. They would pass that on to the so-called psychotics. People heard the voices and saw visions. They would train them instead of locking them up in physical and chemical straitjackets and doing all things like drugging, shocking, and restraining them. But that's anyway what that quote from, well, both of the quotes from Dion Fortune, one in the Occult Book and one in the Witches Almanac, remind me of. Right, so I'll continue there. The Art of Causing Change, and this is back to the Witches Almanac and the article Magic That Works, which, let me look at the end here. Who was it written by? It was written by someone named David Conway. Okay, but I'll get back to it. It's a little bit longer than most of the articles that I've seen as flipping through the book. But here, I'll continue with The Art of Causing Change. The Art of Causing Change. What has by now become a standard definition of magic was provided by Aleister Crowley, no saint but no monster either, who defined it as the art of causing change to occur in conformity with the will. Dion Fortune, his more respectable contemporary, called it the art of causing changes to occur in consciousness. But this tells us little, as changes in consciousness can be induced by a variety of means, among them drugs, meditation, and fasting, none of which requires us to put on ceremonial dress or, as the case may be, strip off and invoke pagan gods. No, by change, Crowley certainly meant more than a different state of awareness from our everyday one. I actually think, though, that the argument that Conway is making here might not be accurate, or maybe even show that an understanding of Dion Fortune, especially if we look at it in contrast with what I just mentioned from Andrew Weil's book, The Natural Mind, where he says that psychotics may be the evolutionary vanguard of our species because they have the ability to change reality simply by changing their minds. So a change in consciousness is a change in mind, and therefore you can change reality. So maybe perhaps this is something like Occam's razor. What can be done with less is done in vain with more, right? Simplicity. Maybe it's summed up in just that saying, if you have a deeper understanding that magic is the art of causing changes to occur in consciousness, right? Or the science and art of causing changes in consciousness at will. I think what the Occult Book did was combine both Aleister Crowley's and Dion Fortune's quotes together. Maybe that's what it looks like, because we have in this section, the art of causing change. It quotes Aleister Crowley as saying the art of causing change to occur in conformity with the will, right? And then it quotes Dion Fortune as saying the art of causing changes to occur in consciousness, right? But then if we look at the Occult Book, it says the science and art of causing changes in consciousness at will. So it adds the at will part, or the will part from Aleister Crowley, to the changing in consciousness with Dion Fortune, and then adds the word the science and art. So it looks like it actually compounded both of those sayings there. And I'm not sure which is accurate, but it's actually a pretty good one. But let's continue here. Alright, so Crowley certainly meant more than a different state of awareness from our everyday one. Again, I have to repeat that Andrew Weil talks about, this is Dr. Andrew Weil says that psychotics, and I'll just say untrained witches or untrained magicians, sorcerers, warlocks, have the ability to change reality simply by changing their mind. Alright, continuing. To understand the mechanics of magic, so to speak, we have to remind ourselves that reality is more, far more than what our senses reveal. It is presumptuous to think otherwise, implying, as it does, that nothing can exist unless it's perceptible. Right? So we have to remind ourselves that reality is more, far more than what our senses reveal. It is presumptuous to think otherwise, implying, as it does, that nothing can exist unless it is perceptible. Even scientists believe otherwise, now that particle physics have demonstrated that the smallest components of matter straddle a frontier between the spatial temporal world we occupy and another, no less real, in which neither space nor time exists. Not only is the latter beyond our understanding, but also beyond our conceptual reach, given that our imagination is nourished by our environment and nothing outside it. The miracle of the one thing. Here we go again, back to my thesis. It looks like it's going to, right? All knowledge and all powers in all places at all times. Again, Wallace D. Wattles reminds us of it in The Science of Getting Rich. The theory that one is all and that all is one. That one substance manifests itself as the seemingly many elements of the material world. And that in the beginning of this article, Magic That Works says that these are but the million faces of Brahman, right? Herein lies the secret of why magic, real magic, works. Continuing. The miracle of the one thing. Only by analogy can we attempt to grasp what lies beyond, since, although both are manifestly different, the here that is familiar to us and the inconceivable there are essentially one and the same. It is this unity and the relationships among its myriad parts that magic seeks to exploit. In words attributed to the legendary Hermes Trismegistus, that which is above is like that which is below, to accomplish the miracle of the one thing. The same principle applies as much to the world around as to any hypothetical reality beyond it. It permits us to adopt what I call an integrated approach to the natural world, one that enables us to discern the implicit unity among its many parts. Thanks to this, and as Dion Fortune would maintain, to an appropriate change in consciousness, we are able, for example, to discern the hidden virtues of plants, whether medical or magical, something witches have traditionally been doing for centuries. It explains why the local cunning man or woman is still esteemed in rural Wales, where I grew up. Eyes of the soul. What he or she does, of course, is discern the very being of things, thereby observing the landscape with what Jacob Boehm, let me see, how do you pronounce that name? Jacob Boehme? We'll say Boehm. I'm going to pronounce it Boehm, spelled Boehme. We'll pronounce it Boehm for now. Okay, eyes of the soul. What he or she does, of course, is discern the very being of things, thereby observing the landscape with what Jacob Boehm, the Silesian mystic, famously called the eye of the soul. The technique can be mastered by anyone minded to do so. Yet, like many traditional practices, it is often overlooked by contemporary witches, either because most live in towns or cities and have lost touch with the countryside, even with nature herself, or because they prefer working with fellow coven members at what they regard as more exciting stuff. For many, ritual and the company of others are preferable to a solitary walk in the woods. More's the pity. But then the preference is understandable. Few would deny, after all, that magic is most vividly experienced in a semi-formal setting where it emerges from the collaborative effort of several people, all compatible and all prepared to work together more or less harmoniously. I say more or less because a little rivalry, even a hint of tension, can sometimes add zest to the proceedings. It then becomes far easier to gain access to supra-sensible reality, a condition, for we can hardly call it a place, that goes by a variety of names, one of the most popular being the inner places. Correspondences sympathetic and symptomatic. We reach this suprasensible reality by attaining a higher level of consciousness, helped by the impact of symbols, colors, sounds, and scents, as well as the overall choreography of the ritual proceedings. These elements will have been selected with an eye on the aim of the operation and on whatever supernatural being or force is to be evoked. Here, use is made of the correspondences, sympathetic to it and, if you like, symptomatic of it. With their assistance, we aspire to exchange the conditioned reality we normally occupy for the unconditioned one beyond it, and thereby earth, so to speak, a specific impulse within it. That's interesting. One of the practices that I have been teaching since 2004 is called Dream Action Yoga. And I came up with my subtext for that from a book I read called The Heart of Yoga by, his name will come to me in a moment, but what's more relevant here is what this reminded me of, is where he says, with their assistance, we aspire to exchange the conditioned reality we normally occupy for the unconditioned one beyond it, thereby earth, so to speak, a specific impulse within it. So the subtitle of my Dream Action Yoga, DAY, is called Exposing the Conditioned Personality. So my practice of Dream Action Yoga, in first starting with the pranayama, the breath, the breathing meditation, simply the meditation, the meditare, the thinking itself, is to expose the conditioned personality. So it's nice to see that mentioned here. But it's not my original thought. It's one that I adopted, and like I said, it's one of the main things that stuck out to me in that book, The Heart of Yoga. Oh, the author is TKV Desikachar, now I recall. But yes, there's one section in there where he says expose something. I don't know what the full text of it is, but he talks about exposing the conditioned personality. So I adopted that in my yoga practice, which a lot of people have called many things. One of the main ones they've called it is, they've said that it's Kundalini Yoga. Others have called it Kriya, and even Tantric Yoga. But if I was going to call it anything, I would simply call it a pranayama, or the yoga of breath, because that's where it all operates for me. That's the main thing that I lead in my classes, but call it what you will. I just call it Dream Action Yoga, exposing the conditioned personality. All right, I'll back up and continue from that part, and this is in the part of the article called Correspondences, Sympathetic and Symptomatic, and it says, with their assistance, we aspire to exchange the conditioned reality we normally occupy for the unconditioned one beyond it, and thereby earth, so to speak, a specific impulse within it. As the 19th century magus Eliphas Levi declared, analogy, represented by the correspondences we've assembled, is the last word of science and the first word of faith, the sole possible mediator between the visible and the invisible, between the finite and the infinite. But magic is nothing if not practical, and, as such, it has a purpose beyond passive enjoyment of a heightened awareness, always at risk of degenerating into mere self-indulgence. Outward vesture. Levi, whose given name at birth was Alphonse Louis Constant, described ritual as the outward vesture of every magical operation, by which he meant that its function was to serve and stimulate the volitional and creative powers of the imagination, so that a specific objective might be attained. Experience does indeed show that the more involved participants become in what happens around them, seduced, as it were, by the outward vesture, the greater the energy available to realize a collective intention. In addition, now that reminds me of another thing, of shared dreaming and the possibility of that, and something that I realized could be happening with that. Just a quick hint to that is when people go to watch movies or concerts together, and you can adapt shared dreaming by simply playing, for example, television programming has the same thing playing at the same time, right? That is, if you don't use some kind of recording device. So if two people in two different places were to put at a certain volume a television or radio program or cable program that's playing the same thing at the same time and leave it on while they go to sleep, the same things playing across that program going into their consciousness while they both slept would help give them a link to each other's dream, a bridge, if you will, because they're hearing the same thing being played out at the same time. That's assuming, especially if it is being played out and broadcast at the same time simultaneously to the different spaces where they are. But that's just a little hint into a very simple way into the shared dreaming experience. I think I covered that in a previous podcast on Uniquilibrium, but I'll get deeper into that some other time. I actually use the binaural beats and different isochronic tones, frequencies, and compositions to accomplish that. But continuing here, so experience does indeed show that the more involved participants become in what happens around them, seduced as it were by the outward vesture, the greater the energy available to realize a collective intention. In addition, should conditions be right, it may even contrive to render objective whatever is visualized, a process familiar to psychical researchers and known in the East as Kriya Shakti. It enables archetypal forms and other entities not of this world to take on form and substance in our midst, seemingly every bit as solid as ourselves. By the way, those in some traditions are known as, in the Tibetan tradition, they're known as tulpas, or otherwise mind-made matter. To put it very simply, tulpas. Okay, a quasi-sacramental quality. It would nevertheless be wrong to think of Levi's outward vesture as no more than a means to this end and devoid of any merit of its own. The truth is that through long association, the elements which comprise it become imbued with the very forces they purport to represent, acquiring in the process a quasi-sacramental quality. A sacrament is defined by theologians as the visible sign of an invisible grace. A sacrament is defined by theologians as the visible sign of an invisible grace. Thus, a given symbol not only points to a supernatural reality, itself inexpressible, but more importantly, contains something of its essence. That is why meticulous attention must be paid to getting the details of a magical operation exactly right. Failure to do so may not lead to catastrophe, although some people have come perilously close. I'll have to add, I have, definitely. So that is why meticulous attention must be paid to getting the details of a magical operation exactly right. Failure to do so may not lead to catastrophe, although some people have come perilously close, but it does mean that one's magical efforts will have been in vain. On the other hand, if one goes by the book, then success is guaranteed. Again, this is due to the sacramental quality of the outward vesture, for success proceeds from the ritual itself and not from the merits of whoever performs it. A consequence theologians sum up rather well by distinguishing between the act, ex opere operatus, and the agent responsible for its execution, ex opere operantis. Certainly, the lesson for ceremonial magicians and witches alike is to get the details right each and every time. The educated will. All of which may seem far removed from the spells and good luck charms, let's not mention the curses, for which old-fashioned witches were long famed. In all cases, however, the principle remains the same, for as Levi points out, a practice, even though it be superstitious and foolish, will be efficacious because it is a realization of the will. Elsewhere, he refers to it as the educated will, and on this, Aleister Crowley would later base his personal philosophy, opting to call it, with a brief nod to Rabelais, the law of dilemma. Crowley, born 8 months after Levi's death in 1875, declared himself to be none other than an incarnation of that magus. It makes sense, for, all things considered, it is indeed our will that ultimately sponsors the changes magic brings about, whether these occur inside our consciousness, as Dion Fortune maintained, or objectively in the world around us. Given the hermetic connection between the microcosm, that is, each of us, and the macrocosm, that is, everything, we are entitled to regard every informed act of will as a local manifestation of that supreme will which quickens and directs the universe itself. Yes, indeed, magic works. And that is, again, from David Conway. That was a 2016 excerpt from the Witches Almanac. And now, I did mention earlier I was going to go to read the section in the Occult Book about the death of Jesus. Remember, the thesis here is all knowledge and all power is in all places at all times. And as Flora Elizabeth Carrasco said, the way you want to live your life is mastered by your own self. So here we go. And this also is some of the exposing of the conditioned personality here. I did look at this at some point in time earlier, and it's another thing that resonated with me. So this is back to the Occult Book, and this is page 13, dated 33 CE. We have a picture, the crucifixion. It's a painting, it looks like, from around 1510, a painting by 16th century Italian artist known as the Master of the Risen Magdalene from the Yale University Art Gallery, The Death of Jesus. According to his 4 official biographers, I'm assuming he's talking about the New Testament guys. According to his 4 official biographers and the faith of 20 centuries of devout believers, Yeshua ben Mariam, now more commonly known as Jesus Christ, was the Son of God, born to a Jewish virgin who performed miracles, founded the Christian religion, and died on the cross to redeem humanity. That understanding is so deeply ingrained in the cultures of the Western world that it can be a shock to realize that for centuries after his lifetime, a great many people in the Roman world interpreted Jesus in a very different way, as a practicer or a practitioner of magic. Jewish literature from the 1st century CE names him Jesus ben Pantera, the illegitimate son of a Roman soldier by a Jewish woman who went to Egypt as a migrant worker, learned magic there, and attracted a following after his return to Judea. The identical story appears in the surviving fragments of a work by the pagan philosopher Celsus against the Christians. Many early Christian writers mentioned versions of this belief, as it was one of the principal arguments against which they had to contend. Other mages apparently shared the same opinion. The name of Jesus appears early and often on amulets and in books of spells as a word of power that can be used to command spirits. And 2 of the 3 earliest portrayals of the crucifixion are on magical amulets, surrounded by incantations. This narrative, that Jesus of Nazareth was a Jewish sorcerer whose followers redefined him as a god after his death, presented a struggle for newborn Christianity. In fact, this belief probably played an important role in the fear and hatred with which mainstream Christianity has regarded occultism ever since. The death of Jesus. I wonder if there's anything else in this book that I want to look at, because here I am past an hour in this reading and commentary on this thesis that all knowledge and all power is in all places at all times. And I think that that would be the last thing I looked at. I didn't really look at the book too much, but there's a quote that I did miss, and I suppose I'll finish with that for now. Magic is the traditional science of the secrets of nature, which has come down to us from the mages. Eliphas Levi, Doctrine and Ritual of High Magic, 1855. Apparently, me, Hakim, I'm a witch, or a warlock, if you will, because so much of what is spoken of in these things is exactly resonant with my understanding. You've been listening to WarLock Eternal, presented by Hakim Alibokus Alexander on Spreaker, Social Podcasting, and Wisdom, Social Audio Inc., presented for World Reading Club in association with ExercisingYourMind.com, WorldReadingClub.com, and Uniquilibrium, sponsored by the Blog Dealer at blogdealer.com, where you can go and get your health, fitness, and fat reduction products. I'd like to say hello to anybody who, in Wisdom over here, who's stopped by to sit a spell and listen, or is passing through. Hello, Sakara Alexis, John Bush, Miss Breaker, Christopher John Martins, Wendy Rodriguez, Mary Kay, Julie, Doobie, Alberto Hill, and Roy. Thanks for passing through or stopping by to sit a spell. Until next time, WarLock Eternal.